If you clicked on this video, you have probably at least considered moving to New York at some point. You've looked at salaries in your field. You've looked at apartments online. The math looks close enough to possible. Maybe it even is. But there's a version of what New York costs that doesn't show up in that calculation, and most people don't find it until after they've signed the lease. A one-bedroom in New York runs around $4,600 a month. That's the average. In Manhattan, it's closer to $5,400. A public school teacher in the city earns around $90,000 a year. A nurse at a city hospital earns around $85,000. A firefighter earns around $80,000. Take any of those salaries, divide by 12, subtract the rent, and what's left has to cover food, transport, student loans if there are any, and everything else. The math is tight for a single person. For a family, it usually doesn't work at all. The city's median household income is $79,700. That's the midpoint. Half the city earns less. Among households earning under $50,000, more than 8 in 10 spend over a third of their income on rent. Financial advisors call that rent-burdened. In New York, it's just called living there, and yet 8.5 million people do, which means the city has figured out ways to make that work, or at least some people in it have. The rent is the number people plan for. The move-in bill is the one that tends to surprise them. Until June 2025, moving into a New York City apartment cost an average of $13,000 before you owned a single piece of furniture. First month's rent, a security deposit, and a broker fee. The way it worked: a landlord hires a broker to find a tenant. The broker lists the apartment online. You find it on Zillow, schedule a viewing, decide you want it, and at the lease signing, you pay the broker's commission, not the landlord who hired them. You. Typically 15% of the annual rent due up front. On a $4,000 apartment, that's $7,200. On top of first month and deposit, you're writing checks totaling around $13,000 before you've bought a single fork. New York was one of only 2 cities in the country where this was normal. A law passed in 2024 shifted that fee back to the landlords. It took effect in June 2025. Some landlords responded by raising the monthly rent to cover it. The upfront cost came down. The monthly cost went up. About 1 million apartments in the city are rent stabilized. The way it works, the city sets a cap on how much a landlord can raise the rent each year, recently around 2 to 3%, and the tenant has the right to renew as long as they want. The median rent in one of those apartments is around $1,500 a month. 2 apartments in the same building, same floor, same layout, sometimes the same view. One tenant pays $1,400 because they moved in 1987, and the rent has nudged up a few percent each year. The one next door pays $4,800 because the previous tenant left last year and the landlord reset it to whatever the market would bear. There's no application process for a stabilized apartment, no waitlist, and no income check. You find one the same way you find any other apartment, by looking. The $3,400 monthly difference between those 2 units comes down almost entirely to when each person arrived and what they happened to find. The people who got here years ago and landed one of those leases can afford to stay. The people arriving now are searching a pool where $4,600 is the average, and nothing about that number is going to change based on what they earn. New York added 1.2 million jobs over the last 10 years. Over the same period, it built 400,000 new homes. The people who took those jobs needed somewhere to live, and the housing wasn't there. In 2023, the city's vacancy rate, the share of apartments sitting empty and available to rent, hit 1.4%, the lowest it had been since 1968. Out of 2.35 million rental units across all 5 boroughs, 33,000 were available. The reason the city can't build its way out of this goes back to 1961. That year, New York rewrote its zoning rules, the laws that govern what can be built where. Across roughly 85% of the metro area's residential land, those rules only allow single-family houses. 1 home, 1 family, 1 building. Apartment buildings, the only type of housing that can realistically add supply at scale in a city this dense, are illegal on most of the land available. Those rules are still mostly in place. The city has tried to update them repeatedly. Each time, the people most likely to push back are the homeowners in the neighborhoods targeted for new development. Their homes are worth more precisely because the rules limit how much competition can be built nearby. They show up to local planning meetings and community board votes, and they tend to win. New York built housing for roughly a third of the workers it added in the last decade. The other two-thirds found something: a stabilized apartment if they were lucky, a market rate lease if they could afford it, a roommate situation if they couldn't, or they left. The calculation most people run before moving to New York is salary minus rent. What it tends to leave out is the $13,000 to get in the door, the gap between a stabilized and a market rate lease in the same building, and a vacancy rate that means you're competing with most of the city for whatever happens to be available the week you're looking. Whether it makes sense depends on what the job pays and what apartment surfaces at the moment of the search. The people who arrived 20 years ago and found a stabilized lease are doing the math differently than the ones arriving now. The vacancy rate stays low as long as the zoning rules written in 1961 stay in place. Those rules have survived every attempt to change them so far. They're not laws of nature. They're more like zoning codes, and zoning codes can be rewritten.